Today is the day. I've got this old Suzuki four-wheeler I've been working on for a while. I got it running the other day, and I actually put some new brake shoes on it the other day, but of course the drum was full of grease, and I kind of came to the conclusion that it was so full of grease not really because the seals were so bad, but because the grease had never been cleaned out and redone, and so the grease had practically liquefied. It was basically like really nasty oil. But anyway, I finally just couldn't live with myself after putting it back together, so I ordered up a brand new set of seals. These are the bearing seals, and this thicker one I'm fairly certain goes on the back of the brake drum, which, if that is the case, it doesn't even actually have a seal on it right now. And of course these are the new bearings. They are a pre-greased, sealed bearing that goes in there. And then I also got in the mail, just by coincidence, a new ignition coil today. So that'll be going on. But I'm going to tear into this right now, and we'll see what happens. It shouldn't take me long to get this apart either, since I've already done it once. They always say it's easier the second time around. Wow, that is on there. There we go. Ta-da! Step one. Are these nuts back on the studs, just to keep from losing them. It's always a good idea. And I say as I drop one on the ground and immediately lose it. Can't go wrong with a good old trusty dusty pair of channel locks, I do say. Yet again, as I sit here and completely ruin this. It's another thing, whenever I took this thing apart the first time, somebody's been into this thing before, they torqued this nut down so tight that I had to stick a crowbar, about a 3-foot long crowbar, wedge it in the studs, with the nuts on of course, so it wouldn't ruin the threads, to hold it still, and I had to break this off with a breaker bar that was also about 3 feet long. I really, for a minute there, was expecting something to get properly broken. That nut doesn't need to be on there that tight. I don't care what anybody says. That's why it's got a cotter pin to keep it from loosening. It doesn't have to be that tight. Same with these jam nuts right here. That's why there's a jam nut. You do not want to tighten this inner nut really incredibly tight. It will preload and destroy the bearings in this thing. There you go. The outer nut has to be tightened down pretty snug against the inner nut, and that keeps either one of them from moving. So, always remember that. If you're messing with something like this that has a nut holding bearings in, if it has a jam nut, the nut that goes against the bearing or whatever is on the inside that's initially holding whatever it is in usually does not have to be incredibly tight. Take the brakes and stuff apart. And I don't know, it just seemed to me like it was easier to take it apart on this side and yank the axle out that direction. And which, of course, whenever I get to it in a minute, I'll show you guys how that comes apart as well. Just set that right over there. The brake drum just slips right off, or it should anyway. Let me loosen the lever up here a little bit and then it'll come off. There we go. And you know what? I'll just do it that way. Brake shoes are off. Those springs are a fun old time when you don't have real brake tools, which of course I don't. And you figure at this point in my life I would. And I've actually had this very exact same conversation with an actual person, not sitting here by myself working on something before. And it still hasn't happened. Which is a 12mm. That one zipped right off. Flew right out of my hand. These also have these little washers behind them. The washers tend to stick on there once you get the nut off, and if you don't watch it, you'll go to pull something apart and that washer will go flying right off from there. Right there's one of them stuck on there right now. Which I knew that, which is why I mentioned it. And also, if you're wondering why that was so hard to pull off, it's because this little skid plate down here has been bashed and jacked up 10 ways to Sunday, and it was catching on the edge of this. So, next thing, I'm going to take this little brake lever off here. It's a 10mm. As soon as I find my 10mm socket, which I literally just had in my hand, there it is. And a good old 10mm wrench. Do the trick just perfectly. Get in here to it. This is one of those things, the back side of this brake cam right here is splined. Of course, this doesn't want to go on there. There we go. Drop that. But anyway, the back side of this thing is splined. Well, I'll show it to you. But anyway, when you go to take this off, you want to pull this bolt all the way out. It's not one of those things where it loosens it and it crunches it on there. This thing actually has this little notch in it right there, and the bolt rides in it like that. That's what keeps this from sliding out. So when you go to take this off, pull this bolt all the way out, and I promise it will make your life much, much easier. If you can see right there, that's the chain tensioner. I'm going to loosen that. So let me actually kind of readjust here where you guys can sort of see. There we go. And let me get my big ratchet and a big socket, which is 17mm, by the way, for anybody that's wondering. This is also part of the brake cam that just flew out of there. Just set that down right there so it doesn't get lost, put it in parts bin. But anyway, that bolt is kind of in an awkward spot. If you're using a big ratchet like me, I've got one. It's a half-inch drive, and I've got a 3/8 adapter with the socket on it, and that gives me just enough extension to get on this side of this brace, and I mean just barely enough room to stick that down in there and loosen this bolt. But it does work. So yeah, there's that. And I'm going to loosen that way up there, just for good measure. So now, let's move to the other side, shall we? Okay, so now I'm on the left side of the four-wheeler, and I'm going to take this wheel off first, obviously. And I'm going to show you guys, you know, the whole taking off the chain and that sort of thing. I'm actually going to jack this thing up a pump or two. This junky old floor jack I've got has just about had it. And on this side, I'm not going to be pulling this hub off this side because it's not necessary over here. Next thing we're going to do is Let's see how well you guys can see it. This little nut right here. On this four-wheeler, it's a 10 millimeter. I don't know if it will be on yours or not, because I'm fairly certain that this is not an original thing on this four-wheeler. And then it's got these little tabs. I don't know how well you can see them. Let me move the camera again. It's got these little tabs. You just flip them up. Generally, these things are going to have like 4 or 5 of these all the way around. And just like I was talking about with that nut, that's not original. Or, well, the nut that's not original on this four-wheeler. Another thing about it, pretty much all those tabs except for these two over here are broke off on this thing. So, yeah, almost nothing holding this chain guard on. And so, you got inside here, drive sprocket up here, tensioner, which I will go ahead and tell you is pretty much wore completely out on this four-wheeler. And, you got the drive sprocket, or the driven sprocket, the axle sprocket. While I'm at it right here, let me go ahead and stick that back on here. So probably the next thing to do be to go ahead and, oh, dang, of course I smashed my thumb in that, but it's loose. So that's loose as it can possibly be. And the next thing I'm going to do is take the chain off, which will consist of a couple of different things. I'm going to go ahead and pull the tensioner all the way off while we're in here and at it, just so it's out of the way. And then right up here, let me move the camera in closer since it doesn't zoom, you got a 10 millimeter nut and a Phillips head bolt that goes right in there. Or, well, it's a 10 millimeter bolt. I don't know why. I guess because this one down here needs to have a flat profile, but yeah, a Phillips head and a 10 millimeter, and all that is just this little chain guard right here that keeps the chain from, like, if it flies off or has too much slop, it keeps it from wadding up inside of there. It's just a retainer, more or less. And then the nut and bolt down here on the tensioner is a 12 millimeter, which I will get with a 12 millimeter wrench right now. That up a little bit. This is another one of those things, your life will be easier, probably, anyway, if you just go ahead and let that bolt drop right out of there. Of course, obviously it's not going to make my life too easy, because that thing is quite stubborn, apparently. Plus everything is coated in a nice, heavy coat of oil, because I oiled this chain 10 ways to Sunday yesterday. I keep saying nut, but it's a bolt. It's an actual bolt, folks. And also, it doesn't have to be tightened up Superman tight. And it actually doesn't have to come all the way off. It's just got to be just enough where you can roll the chain off. Which is probably going to be better off to do it down here on the big end. Yeah. Just like that right there. And the chain is off. I'll just go ahead and flip this back around and just very loosely just kind of do that. So pretty much at this point, this axle is ready to come out of here. You can pull the axle right out. Let me back the camera up a little bit so I don't knock it over and destroy it or something. And I will demonstrate. Pull this chain off, set it over here. And just like that, there's the axle. And so now that the axle's off and the sprocket's out of the way, those 3 nuts I took off earlier, this is the other end of them. And just like the other end, it's a 12mm. And also, the only other thing you got to take off here is this part of the guard. And that's a 10mm up here, and there's supposed to be a 10mm right there. And of course, it's gone. Just, you know, par for the course here on this four-wheeler from what I've experienced with it so far. Also, these are not actually threaded in here, but if you kind of hit them with the impact to get them started, it makes it a lot easier to get them out. I'll put that one right over there. So, I'm going to get a 10mm on. And that's also, in order to get this 10mm out to pull the carrier out of the center. I guess you wouldn't really have to take this off, but it does make things easier. It makes it a lot easier to see and that sort of thing. Do the same thing right here, just kind of stick that back on there. And so pretty much the only thing you got left before you can drop the carrier out is I don't know how well you can see it, but right here, that's a 14mm, and then underneath right here where the little legs are, right there where my thumb is, that's a little leg that holds it up, there's a 10mm bolt in here, and there's 2 of them normally, but of course, just like I've said multiple times already, there's only 1 on this one, because the other one at some point in time, somebody's bottomed this thing out and broke the other one off. I'm telling you guys, this old four-wheeler has, it's seen some things and some stuff. Wow, speaking of some things and some stuff, got a nice little blood blister from that stupid chain tensioner. Oh well, I will live. Get her started off from there. And we'll see what we've got to work with here. Yeah, there we go. Also, I don't know if this is the original bolt or not that came in here. Probably not, knowing the way most things on this four-wheeler are. But where it's been tightened down, there's a nice little hex-shaped cup that it pretty much sits in on the top of this aluminum housing. So you pretty much don't have to worry about sticking a wrench on top of it to hold it still. And then this will actually, there we go, fold up and out of the way. Which, in turn, I will go ahead and, one way or the other, can't make up my mind, just stick that right there, let it hang loose. Now, at this point, let me back up here just a hair again. What I'll do is lift up the back of the four-wheeler, and I'm going to stick this jack stand over here underneath that little trailer hitch part and move the jack out of the way so I've got a little bit more room to work. Slide that over here, lift that way up there. There we go. So then, the next thing to do is going to be to pull this little bolt out down here. Like I said before, 10mm. Get the old impact out. Pretty sure I've got enough room for it to fit in there. Yes, I do. And let that just kind of flop down there, which normally it probably wouldn't kind of just sag down there that much, but just like I've talked about already, everything on this four-wheeler is more or less wore slap out or really beat up in some kind of way. But there you have it, folks. Got the carrier out of it, and that's all there is to it. I mean, it really doesn't take very long. And so what I'm about to do now is I'm gonna pop the seals and bearings out of it and slap some new ones in it. Okay, so I've got the carrier in the house, my workbench, got it on the vise. It's not in the vise, but it's just a good work surface. Excuse the ridiculous mess on my workbench here with this four-wheeler project and everything else I've had going on the last few days. Things have really piled up in a hurry. But anyway, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to spread this vise out just about, well, actually, before I even do that, I'm getting ahead of myself here. I'm going to take this thing and I'm going to sort of clamp it in this vise. I tell you right now, though, this is cast aluminum. Do not crank one of these down incredibly tight in a vise. It will destroy something. I'm just kind of snugging it in here a little bit, enough where I could pop the seal out, which that one actually popped right out. So then, take it, flip it over, do the same thing on the other side, kind of get it in there. You kind of got to get it at a strange angle, but it's fine. There we go, stick a screwdriver in there, pow, vise for the win. Now, the thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the vise where it's spread out just enough where I can lay it on here and it's catching the edges of the housing on both sides. And so what you want to do, this thing's got a little sleeve in it there, and the sleeve is just floating in there. And I don't know how well you can see it, but there's a little bit of an exposed edge on that bearing down there. And so what I'm going to do is lay this right in here. Get myself a nice good old handy dandy punch. Got one right here. Stick it down in there and get it on the edge of that bearing and tap it out. That didn't really get it all the way out, but it got it close. There we go. And there she went. And there went the sleeve right behind it. That fell right out of there. But there you go. Get on the edge, you just tap the bearing out with a punch or a big screwdriver or anything that you can get down in there. And then here's the sleeve, of course, covered in grease. I need to find something good to lay this on. So now I knocked the seals out, knocked one bearing out, take this thing, flip it upside down, and now that the sleeve has fallen out, you've got all the surface in the world to knock that other bearing out. So, not a problem. Switch from side to side a little bit here. And there she goes. Right out on the floor. Right where it belongs. And like I said, these are a completely sealed front and rear bearing. So you don't grease them when you go to stick them in there or anything like that. And so the way I'm going to install this bearing is the good old tried and true rubber mallet. Just lightly kind of start pecking it in there. You don't want to smack this thing real hard. You don't want to get it started in there sideways. It will make your life difficult. And there you go. You guys remember the good old steel sleeve. Make sure that's free of any dirt. It appears to be, other than the spider web that was hanging off of it there. Take it, slap it down in there. Like I said, just a little double check once over, make sure it's good and clean. And then you get your other bearing. I already ripped this one open earlier because I was looking at them just to make sure they were the right stuff. And take that, slide it right down there on top of it. There we go. You just gotta be gentle and pretty patient with it, and it will slide right in there. Actually, let me give that another little tap or two to make sure it's seated. Like I said, and you have a lot more I guess it's a lot more forgiving, I should say, if you're doing that with a rubber mallet. I mean, yeah, you have to sit there and peck on it longer and more and all that jazz, but it is much less likely to destroy something on accident. Betsy. Now, let me get the regular hammer. There we go. It's tap, tappity, tap. Just tappity. Just tappity. So there you have it. There's a new bearing and seal on one side. Flip that dude over. Check out the copious amount of grease that's in here. And I believe I've got it under control here. Come on. Wow. These seals are really being uncooperative. I've actually had better luck just kind of pressing them in there by hand and then tapping them down. There we go. That went in there 100 times better than what it did just trying to tap it. Here's the brake drum. Got a machine surface right there. Wham bam. I don't know how well you can see that because of the light. That seal fits directly and smoothly onto that brake drum. Which probably explains why the dang brake drum was completely full of grease when I went to change the brakes, because it didn't have an old one of these on it. So yeah, there we go. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. New bearings, new seals, new brakes, so on and so forth. Okay, so I've slid the axle back in, and I've reinstalled the chain and the chain tensioner, and tightened up this little retainer clip right here, which is a Phillips head screwdriver and a 10mm bolt. Okay, take two on the whole chain tensioner thing. There we go. So just like I talked about before, you got just enough room to get your ratchet and socket in there. The way we're going to do these brake shoes here, I honestly should have stuck these back on here before I put the axle back in, but that's okay. There we go. And then in order to get this adjusted out, well, channel locks. There we go. Spin that around flat. Then yet again, take your good old handy dandy trusty dusty channel locks. There we go. The brake shoes are in. Simple as that. Also, another thing to be noted too, at this point in time, you see this thread sticking out here. You might be tempted to go ahead and stick your axle nuts back on there, but I will go ahead and tell you, if you do that, you'll have to take them right back off again, because the hole in this dust shield right here will not fit over the axle nuts. It's one of those kind of situations. If you don't believe me, ask me how I know. Maybe I did.
Very nice.